Welcome back, Sebastian here. Time for my power rankings for the 2024 Spanish Grand Prix. Of course, as you can see, I've got my makeshift board, and we're going to try to get through this as best we can. So, starting with number 20, I have Logan Sargent. Now, for Sargent, a bit of a tricky weekend again. Qualified dead last and finished dead last in a race where all 20 drivers finished the Grand Prix. Besides that, not a whole lot to add. I think the gap to Sargent to Albon was quite large, so that's not ideal. The race itself, not really a whole lot more to comment on. It seemed to be a pretty tough weekend all around for Williams based on where his teammate went. That being said, not really anyone else I felt I could really put in 20th. Number 19, I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen. Now, for Magnussen, a bit of a tricky weekend. Out-qualified by his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, knocked out in Q1 again. In the race, I think made up some positions, so that's okay. But all in all, not a great result. Not a great weekend for Magnussen. Number 18, I've got Yuki Tsunoda. For Tsunoda, out-qualified his teammate Daniel Ricciardo again, so that's decent. The race pace though was quite poor. Not sure if there was some kind of issue on the car that could have contributed to it, but just kind of sunk like a stone and spent most of the Grand Prix in last place. Eventually did get past Sargent, but still 19th place finish on the road, several positions behind his teammate, is definitely not what he would have wanted coming into this weekend. Alright, number 17, I've gone with Alex Albon. For Albon, a bit of a tricky weekend. Did out-qualify his teammate Logan Sargent, but that being said, in a main qualifying session, Albon has never been out-qualified by Sargent. So at this point, instead of it being really, a positive, a good thing, it's the expectation. In the race, didn't really go that well. Started from the pit lane, I guess. Made some setup changes to help with tire wear, help make the race a bit easier. Didn't seem to make a massive improvement, finished 18th on the road, and of course also had that trip through the gravel trap as well, so a bit of a small mistake as well. So not a great weekend overall, I felt, for Albon. Number 16, I'm going with Valtteri Bottas. For Bottas, qualifying again went pretty decent. Got himself up into Q2, which I think is really the best that the Sauber can do at the moment. That being said, in the race, just kind of sunk like a stone and finished quite far behind his teammate Joe. Don't think it was a pit stop issue. We didn't see anything that suggested that was the case. Just felt like he was quite slow on pace. Could have been a difference in strategy. That's another possibility. But still, I think particularly for the race, I felt it was a pretty poor weekend for Bottas. Something that's definitely been a trend so far this year. Bottas, of course, has out-qualified Joe every single main qualifying session, but then when you start comparing the race head-to-heads, especially because that's the only way we can differentiate them since both drivers have 0 points, you start to see that Bottas more often than not ends up finishing a couple positions behind Joe, which is definitely not a great sign. Number 15, I've decided to go with Sergio Perez. Would have been a bit lower, but the reality is qualified in P8. I felt that the top 4 cars in qualifying are very, very close. So the reality is, if those 4 cars are all equal on pace, you would expect Perez to naturally qualify 8th. Not saying it's an excuse or anything. He probably should have qualified a little bit higher up, especially since there was like a 3/10, 4/10 gap between the Red Bulls and the Ferraris at the very least. That being said, because of that grid penalty from Canada, where he was of course told to drive back to the pits to try to avoid a safety car, that was basically team instruction, not really his fault. So of course, starting outside the points at tracks like Spain, where it's a bit difficult to overtake, I did try to take that into consideration a bit when judging Perez this weekend. Had a bit of a recovery drive, got himself back up to 8th, which is basically the bare minimum. Anything beyond that was going to be a bit tough, especially since the Red Bull is not as strong on race day as it was last year. Of course, it was still strong enough that Verstappen was able to win the Grand Prix, so you can't say it was really a good weekend either. And all in all, I think another frustrating weekend, but I think because of that grid penalty that was kind of induced by reasons that was really outside of his control. Of course, not crashing would have helped, but in Canada, but that's kind of beside the point since this is power rankings for the Spanish Grand Prix. Now, number 14, I have Lance Stroll. For Stroll, another okay weekend, not terrible. Finished a couple positions behind his teammate Fernando Alonso. I think 10 seconds behind on track. Qualifying, I think it was about a 0.2 of a second gap between himself and Alonso, which is about what you would expect. Not a terrible weekend by Stroll, but not really a great weekend either. So I've just put him in 14th. Number 13, I have Daniel Ricciardo. For Ricciardo, qualifying again, a bit of a struggle, knocked out in Q1. The fact that both he and his teammate Yuki Tsunoda were knocked out in Q1 leads me to believe that it was probably the car not being particularly well suited for the track, or a massive issue with setup that the team were just not able to dial in the setup for qualifying. Race went a bit better for Ricciardo, finished several positions in front of his teammate Yuki Tsunoda. So I think, all in all, the race was not too bad for Ricciardo. So that's why I've put him in 13th. Number 12, I'm going with Oscar Piastri. For Piastri, I think a frustrating weekend. Was unable to set a fast lap in qualifying in Q3. First lap deleted because of track limits. Second lap went off in the gravel, I believe, in the penultimate corner, and that really ruined his chances of really having a great result on Sunday. So that was obviously a big part. The recovery drive on Sunday, I think, was okay. Never really looked like he was going to be able to challenge the Ferraris ahead, who had finished P5 and P6. And given that his teammate finished on the podium, could have potentially won the race with a bit of maybe better strategy, a bit better pace. I think all in all, a bit of a waste of a weekend for Piastri, where he definitely could have, I think, easily finished in the top 4 or 5 positions. Number 11. I decided to go with the homeboy, Fernando Alonso. So for Alonso, another tough weekend in the Aston Martin. Felt like the car really didn't suit this track. So for that being said, it's hard to really put him higher up. Qualifying was okay, got knocked out in Q2. Out-qualified Stroll, beat Stroll in the race. It's about what he was expected to do. But I don't think it was an especially amazing weekend either. So yeah, it's really hard to justify putting him farther up. Number 10, I decided to put Zhou Guanyu. For Zhou, I felt the race was pretty strong. Qualifying, again, a bit of a struggle like it's been all year, but I do tend to put a bit more emphasis on the race. For Zhou, I think finished in a decent position. I believe finished ahead of Stroll as well, which is a decent result in the Sauber. That being said, it really felt like you had 2 drivers in the top 10 in Piastri and Perez who really deserved to finish higher than they did. So of course you have to pick drivers who didn't finish in the top 10 to kind of round things out. But yeah, so I felt Zhou, solid weekend overall. I felt for him. Number 9, I'm gonna go with Nico Hülkenberg. For Hülkenberg, let's see. For Hülkenberg, decent result. I think qualifying went pretty well, of course. Then in the race, finished P11. Of course, had that bit of a clumsy 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Luckily for him, based on where he was on track when the race ended, it meant that the cars directly behind him were basically a lap down. So that 5-second penalty added on didn't really change his position. Similar situation to Magnussen in Saudi Arabia. Alright, so moving on, number 8, I've decided to go with Carlos Sainz. For Sainz, it was a bit of a tricky weekend. Qualified behind his teammate Charles Leclerc again. In the race, I think the race pace was a little bit weaker than Leclerc, but that being said, Sainz had a really good start, and that allowed him to make up positions off the line and lead his teammate for a good chunk of the race. Of course, lost that position because of team orders, which obviously hurts. But that being said, I think if he had been driving faster, it wouldn't have really been a situation that would have happened. Number 7, I'm going to go with George Russell. So for Russell, out-qualified by his teammate Lewis Hamilton, beaten in the race by his teammate Lewis Hamilton. Really for George, the best part of his weekend was the start. Excellent start, got himself up into the lead of the race. Unfortunately from there, it kind of went downhill. Ended up finishing P4 on the road behind his teammate Lewis Hamilton. So again, you're kind of starting to see the signs that we saw 2022, 2023, where I think there aren't really any questions about the qualifying performance of Russell, but I do think there are a decent amount of questions about, his race pace and his ability to really be that team leader, especially if you're expected to go up against a Max Verstappen, a Lando Norris, a Charles Leclerc week in, week out, and really does he have that ultimate one race pace, tire management ability to be able to keep up with those drivers. I think that's something that Mercedes are still trying to figure out the answer to. Number 6, I've gone with Charles Leclerc. I think qualifying felt like the gap itself between the top 3 teams, McLaren, Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari, was quite large. Might have been a setup issue, not entirely sure. But yeah, definitely hindered the Ferraris this weekend. For Leclerc, a bit of a tough start as well, dropped in position to his teammate. That being said, the strategy, the race pace, very, very good overall. So I think overall, not a terrible weekend, kind of damage limitation for Leclerc, and almost got Russell at the end as well. Number 5, I've decided to go with Esteban Ocon. For Ocon, really solid weekend in the Alpine. Of course, at this point, it's kind of hard to judge them because it seems like they've made a lot of improvements last couple weekends. And if this is where they're going to be now, if they're going to regularly be that 5th team who are expected to finish 9th and 10th, then maybe finishing in those positions will not warrant such a high ranking on my place in my ranking. But that being said, I think for Ocon, good result, another points finish. And yeah, again, not perfect. I think was out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate, but still, a pretty good weekend I felt overall for the Alpine duo. Speaking of the other half of the Alpine duo, that's the driver who I've decided to put in 4th place, Pierre Gasly. For Gasly, really solid result, so close to finishing 7th on the road in the Grand Prix. Qualified, I believe, 7th as well, so that's definitely punching a bit above the weight of where we would expect Alpine to be. And I think obviously overall Gasly one of the drivers of the weekend. Now for the top 3, of course, the last 3 drivers are all the 3 drivers who are on the podium, and it's kind of hard to go against that order. So number 3, I kind of gave away the rest of the ranking, but so be it. Number 3, I have Lewis Hamilton. For Hamilton, finally out-qualified George Russell for the first time in a while. Very, very small margins. Might have had the pace for the front row, hard to say. There was definitely a gap there between those cars. But that being said, the race I felt was very, very good. Unfortunately, a bit of a slow start off the line, but he was able to, recover slowly but surely over the course of the race, and ended up getting his first podium of the season. So all in all, a pretty good result for Lewis Hamilton. Number 2, again, kind of following the positions on the podium. That being said, really hard to kind of go against that with how things played out this weekend, and that is Lando Norris. For Norris, qualifying went as well as you could hope, getting pole position. Unfortunately, lost positions at the start, dropped from the lead to P3. If Norris was able to hold on to the lead, stay in the lead from the start of the race, and able to dictate the strategy, I wonder how different the race result looks. Forced to go very, very aggressive on strategy, ended up falling P6 after that first stop, and of course, by staying out so much longer, you lose time. Of course, then you have to fight all the way back to make up that time again, overtaking other cars. So I think the race pace as a whole was pretty good. Strategy maybe a little not so good. But yeah, I really felt that the race start cost McLaren any chance of really competing for the win. As soon as they fell to 3rd with Russell in between, and Verstappen was just able to build that gap, I felt like it was realistically game over for Norris. So finishing up the power rankings, number 1, not really much of a surprise. Oh dear, I can't write an R today, can I? Max Verstappen. So for Verstappen, about as well as you could hope for the race. Qualifying, of course, didn't get pole position. Hasn't gone pole position the last 3 Grand Prix after getting the first 7 of the season. So that's definitely something to note. That being said, the race pace was strong as ever. Just kept things calm, kept things under control. Really decisive with that overtake on Russell early on. That really helped him overall, as it allowed him to kind of put Russell in between himself and Norris, who was his main challenger for the win. And then he just drove off, controlled the tires like he needed to, did a pretty good job with strategy, not too aggressive, not too conservative either. and yeah, just kind of came home for a very, very solid Grand Prix win. So there you go. There's my power rankings for the 2024 Spanish Grand Prix. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Who did you think were some of the best drivers this weekend? Contrarily, who did you think really struggled this weekend? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.